First class wasn't just a seat, it was a statement. It was where confidence dressed itself in polished shoes and whispered conversations, where champagne sparkled in crystal flutes and stress melted into plush leather cushions. The lighting was softer there, the silence more dignified, the air heavy with entitlement and travel perfume. Passengers reclined with the relaxed arrogance of people who believed they belonged there. She didn't look like she belonged. She sat in seat 1A, hoodie pulled over her head, chin tucked slightly down as if she'd learned long ago to take up as little emotional space as possible. Her boarding pass was legitimate, her name on it, her right to sit there unquestionable. But still, she sat quietly, hands clasped, posture straight, a calm tension coiled in her like something trained, not timid. Flight attendants exchanged looks. There was a tone, not loud, not hostile, just dismissive enough to wound and polished enough to look professional. One attendant approached with the kind of rehearsed smile created by airlines and held by habit. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass again?" Her voice was polite, but the word again cut. The woman handed it over without hesitation. Her hands were steady. Her eyes remained lowered, respectful, controlled. The attendant barely glanced before that same tight smile returned. No warmth, only policy. "Yes, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to move you to another seat." Several first-class passengers lifted their eyes just enough to watch the unfolding humiliation, the way people watch a street argument, curiosity disguised as indifference. The businessman across the aisle paused his email. A woman with diamond earrings leaned slightly to listen better. Whispering traveled faster than logic. The woman in 1A didn't argue. There was no raised voice, no dramatic refusal, just a tiny pause, a pause filled with years of learning when to fight and when the fight wasn't worth it. "Is there a reason?" she asked softly. The attendant hesitated just long enough to reveal there wasn't a fair one. "It's a special request situation. Airline policy. We'll need the seat. Please gather your things." No apology. No explanation that made sense. Just authority, and authority rarely feels the need to justify itself to someone who does look like they belong. A few passengers smirked with satisfaction that order had been restored. A few looked uncomfortable but too polite to intervene. Most just watched. She exhaled slowly. She could argue. She could show documentation. She could escalate, but she didn't want to be recorded, judged, laughed at, labeled difficult, or worse, hysterical. She'd had enough of that in life, enough of proving herself, enough of being questioned. So she nodded. "Okay." She stood up quietly. That quiet movement carried more dignity than anyone deserved to witness. It wasn't submission. It wasn't defeat. It was something else entirely, discipline. The quiet acceptance from someone who'd been through much worse than airline arrogance. Her hoodie shifted as she reached up to take her bag from the overhead. That was when it happened. Just for a heartbeat, the fabric lifted. A flash of inked skin appeared across the upper plane of her back. Not decorative, not trendy, something older. Something etched deep into scarred flesh like a badge earned in blood and storms. A trident, bladed, bold, unmistakable. A few faint scars cut across the design, evidence that the tattoo wasn't for aesthetics. It was a history, a declaration, a memory of something most people romanticize without ever understanding the cost. And someone saw it. Not the passengers. Not the crew. The captain. He had just stepped from the cockpit, walking forward with practiced authority, posture straight, expression professional, until his gaze collided with that tattoo. He stopped. Physically stopped. Like the world had yanked him backward. His breath stalled in his chest. His eyes widened with a shock he couldn't hide quickly enough. It wasn't just recognition. It was reverence. It was fear. It was memory. Because you don't accidentally recognize something like that. You earn the right to understand it. He'd served once too, maybe not like her, maybe not where she had, but enough to know exactly what he was seeing. A Navy SEAL trident. But a different kind of one, modified, customized, the kind reserved for a certain classified unit, the kind whispered about, the kind tied to missions no one is allowed to know about long after they're over. And suddenly, the quiet woman being escorted out of first class like an inconvenience wasn't invisible anymore. She was someone extraordinary, someone dangerous, someone who had bled for strangers who would never thank her. The captain's pulse hammered in his ears. He stepped forward instinctively, voice caught in his throat. "Ma'am," he started. But the attendant was already ushering her away with curt efficiency, hand lightly touching her shoulder like moving a misplaced object. "We really need to seat you now," she insisted flatly, either unaware of what she just dismissed or refusing to see it. The woman nodded again, swallowing whatever emotion threatened to rise. Shame, frustration, memory, all pressed down behind discipline. She kept walking, kept breathing, kept being small. The captain watched, torn between what he knew and what he was supposed to do. His mind screamed, "That tattoo doesn't get put on just anyone. People with that tattoo don't ask for special treatment, they avoid it. Something about this isn't right." Meanwhile, turbulence gently bumped the plane as if the sky itself sensed tension brewing. Passengers returned reluctantly to conversations, though attention flickered back again and again to the mysterious woman exiled to economy. She moved through the aisle like a ghost between worlds. Judgment followed her like smoke. Some eyes rolled, some pitied, some dismissed. But she just kept walking, back straight, face unreadable, like humiliation was a familiar companion she had long ago stopped trying to outrun. The captain inhaled slowly, trying to ground himself. Procedure demanded he return to the cockpit. Duty demanded he prepare this plane and its souls for the journey ahead. Logic said this was none of his business. But instinct whispered otherwise. Instinct, and the ghost of every briefing he'd ever attended, where someone mentioned that trident with hushed respect. Why was she here? Why had she been pushed out of the seat she rightfully owned? And why, as he glanced toward the manifest, toward a classified note next to seat 1A, did a cold ripple of dread crawl down his spine? His gaze lifted again. To the aisle. To the woman. To the tattoo he now could not unsee. She blended back into economy, swallowed by cramped seats and narrow space, disappearing among ordinary lives who had no idea who they were sitting beside. But he knew one thing. No one like her ends up in the wrong place by coincidence. Something bigger was already moving. Something dangerous. Something that would make every person on this plane wish they had looked at her with less judgment and more respect. The captain swallowed hard. And for the first time that flight, he was afraid he was already too late. The cabin smelled of recycled air and nervous tension. She had settled into her assigned seat in economy, silently watching the world through narrowed eyes. Every movement of the flight attendants, every shuffle of a passenger, registered in her mind like a series of alarms. She didn't need to see the warning lights in the cockpit to know something was wrong. Her training made her hyper-aware of everything. The subtle change in body language, the way some passengers avoided eye contact, the tension that vibrated in the soles of shoes on the aisle floor. Meanwhile, the captain leaned against the cockpit doorway, his hand gripping the frame like a lifeline. The moment that tattoo had flashed under her hoodie, something deep inside him had jolted awake, a memory of missions where lives were at stake and where a single miscalculation could cost everything. This wasn't a casual recognition. That trident wasn't ornamental. It wasn't just an insignia for a veteran. It was a symbol of lethal efficiency, precision, and survival under circumstances most humans couldn't even imagine. His pulse hammered. He wanted to confront her, to ask questions, to find out why she was here. But he couldn't. Procedure, protocol. The line between civilian and military authority on a commercial flight was razor thin, and yet instinct screamed louder than procedure. She doesn't belong in economy, not like this. He stepped closer, quietly, trying not to draw attention from passengers or crew. His voice was low, almost a whisper, laced with urgency he couldn't suppress. "Ma'am, wait." The words barely left his mouth before the flight attendant interjected, her tone sharp, clipped, professional. "Sir, she needs to move. We can't hold up the flight. Please follow procedures." The captain's eyes flicked between the attendant and the woman. He clenched his jaw. Something inside him was screaming. The trident on her back wasn't a fashion choice. It was a warning, a signal. And yet here she was, forced out of first class, made to feel small and ordinary, completely ignored by everyone around her. She felt the tension too. Something primal stirred within her, something that had been honed through years of missions, hours of preparation, and countless moments where hesitation meant death. She didn't turn around. She didn't flinch. She simply sat, her body still, her eyes scanning the cabin with the kind of calculation that made trained observers uneasy. He recognized it immediately. That calm, controlled energy. The way she scanned the environment, cataloged threats, measured distance, assessed danger. Every movement precise, economical, lethal. This isn't a civilian. The flight continued, the hum of the engines masking the silent tension that had grown exponentially. The passengers were oblivious to the significance of the moment. To them, she was just a quiet, unassuming woman in a hoodie, unfortunate enough to be displaced. But the captain felt the weight of history, the unspoken stories hidden beneath her calm exterior. He glanced at the manifest again, eyes narrowing. There was a note next to her name, a classified alert he had never expected to see on a civilian ticket. Normally, it would trigger a discreet alert to authorities, but here she was, unarmed, unprotected, and seated among ordinary travelers. The captain's heart pounded. He had been in high-risk operations himself, but nothing in his experience prepared him for recognizing a potential threat or asset while flying a commercial airliner. Meanwhile, she had already noticed anomalies in the cabin. A man several rows ahead had been fidgeting, hands tucked into his jacket. He wasn't nervous in the ordinary way. He was calculating, observing, adjusting his position as if preparing for a sudden move. She didn't panic. Her hand rested near her backpack, ready. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. Her eyes flicked to another passenger across the aisle, a woman pretending to read a magazine but clearly tracking movements. Then another, his shoes too shiny, his jacket too heavy for the temperature of the cabin. Patterns emerged. Her training kicked in, analyzing the cabin as a battlefield, every passenger a potential variable. Back in the cockpit, the captain fought with himself. Protocol dictated one thing, instinct another. He reached for the radio, thinking about calling ground control, about alerting security, but hesitation slowed him. What if he overreacted? What if he was wrong? A false alarm could cause panic, but ignoring the signs could be catastrophic. She noticed the captain's gaze lingering on her. A flicker of recognition passed between them, a shared understanding. Neither spoke, but something unspoken passed in that instant. She knew he had seen the tattoo. He had recognized what it meant. And if she was paying attention, she could see the tension coiling in him like a spring about to snap. Then a subtle change in the cabin caught her attention. The man in the jacket had shifted slightly, his hand brushing against something concealed. Not casually, intentionally. Her eyes narrowed, muscles tensing. She didn't move outwardly, but internally her mind cataloged options, escape routes, possible interventions. The captain's pulse accelerated. He had a full plane, no immediate control over the cabin, and a situation unfolding that could escalate into a nightmare. And yet, he couldn't ignore her. The woman who had been forced out of first class was no ordinary passenger. She was a trained operator. And if danger manifested, She would be the only line of defense before disaster struck. He cleared his throat, voice steadier than he felt. "Ma'am, I need you to stay seated, but please remain aware. Something may be wrong." She didn't blink, she didn't respond verbally. Her eyes flicked toward the fidgeting man, assessing, calculating. The captain's words were enough. She didn't need instructions. She already knew the risk and she was preparing. Moments later, turbulence rattled the cabin slightly and a few passengers murmured complaints. But she barely registered it. Her attention was elsewhere, on the subtle movements, the shifts in posture, the small signals that revealed intent. Then her instincts screamed, a silent alarm she hadn't felt in years, but one she couldn't ignore. Something was about to happen, something deliberate, and the man's subtle gestures confirmed her suspicion. She leaned slightly forward, eyes locked on him, nodding the concealed device beneath his jacket. The captain, watching from the cockpit doorway, saw her shift slightly, saw the tension radiate from her body, and realized he had underestimated her presence. This woman, displaced and humiliated, was already assessing threats he hadn't yet fully identified. The thought hit him like a cold wave. She's not just here, she's here for a reason. And then, before anyone else could react, the man in the jacket made a small, almost imperceptible motion, a movement so slight that a casual observer would miss it entirely. But she saw it. She saw the intent, the danger, and the precision behind it. Her hand moved to her backpack, fingers brushing the edge of a concealed item, small, tactical, ready. She didn't panic. She didn't hesitate. Every muscle, every nerve, every ounce of training prepared her for this exact moment. Passengers remained oblivious, chatting, scrolling on phones, sipping drinks, but the air around her felt electric, charged with a silent tension. Something about the man's movement confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated, calculated, dangerous. The captain swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of the situation. He had never seen anything like this on a commercial flight. Panic was the natural reaction, but there was none from her. Only focus, only preparation, only a readiness that demanded respect and fear simultaneously. And then it hit him, the question that would haunt him for the rest of the flight. Who was she really? Because anyone with that tattoo, with that level of composure, with instincts honed for life and death situations, didn't sit quietly in economy by accident. Something bigger was coming, something he couldn't yet see. He had only one choice: trust her. But could anyone? The hum of the engines filled the silence as the flight continued, oblivious to the storm about to erupt. And somewhere deep inside her, she prepared for the inevitable confrontation, ready to act before the threat could strike. And above all, she was patient. Because patience, precision, and deadly skill had always been her allies. And now, at 35,000 feet, they would be tested like never before. The turbulence wasn't the kind that rattled trays or spilled drinks. It was the kind that made the cabin feel alive, as if the airplane itself sensed the tension accumulating among its passengers. She had long ago learned to read subtle vibrations, slight shifts in air pressure, and the faintest movements of human bodies as indicators of intent. Sitting there in economy, hoodie drawn over her shoulders, she scanned the cabin with military precision. Every hand, every foot, every glance was catalogued and stored, ready for action if the moment demanded. Her instincts didn't lie. Something wasn't right. She noticed a man several rows ahead, slightly bulkier than the average traveler, hands buried deep in his jacket, just enough to obscure movement. Not casual, not absent-minded, calculated. She narrowed her eyes, muscles tensing like coiled springs beneath calm skin. Years of covert operations and tactical training told her the device concealed there wasn't a toy. It wasn't a weapon for intimidation. It was designed for chaos. Her pulse remained steady, unshaken, but her senses sharpened. The rest of the cabin carried on with polite ignorance. Passengers whispered, watched movies, scrolled on their phones, completely unaware of the danger lurking in the very rows that cradled their presumed safety. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the captain's pulse thrummed against his ribcage like a warning drum. He had never been more acutely aware of the fragile balance between authority and helplessness. One wrong move in the plane, the lives inside it, and everyone on the ground below could be at risk. He had authority, yes, but not in the same way she did. She could neutralize threats in ways he couldn't, and she had already begun reading the situation. He swallowed hard and glanced at the manifest again. A confidential note marked her as a civilian passenger, but something in him screamed that this was inaccurate. Someone had deliberately omitted her real identity. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, and it complicated the mission he didn't even know had begun. In the cabin, the man in the jacket shifted subtly, adjusting his posture so that one hand lingered near his concealed device. His eyes scanned the aisle like a predator searching for vulnerability. She had already calculated his trajectory. She knew that if he moved without being stopped, the consequences would be catastrophic. She leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing, muscles coiled. Then another detail revealed itself. He wasn't acting alone. Subtle cues, head tilts, small nods, timing of movements, signaled that an accomplice was present, blending into the oblivious crowd. She noted the alignment between them, the spacing, the synchronization. Years of operational experience had taught her to recognize these patterns in the field. This wasn't random chaos. This was coordination, planning, execution. Her mind raced, analyzing every possible outcome. The aisle was narrow. Flight attendants were unarmed. Passengers were unprepared. The cockpit was behind her, inaccessible unless she could reach it without drawing attention. Every possible path of intervention required calculation, speed, and precision. Failure was not an option. She noticed the subtle tremor of the man's hand now. He was nervous but dangerously focused. This combination was volatile. In other words, he could detonate his device at the slightest mistake or move too quickly if interrupted. She had to act, but timing was everything. Too early and he could escalate before the crew or passengers could respond. Too late and lives could be lost. From her peripheral vision, she detected another anomaly, a passenger she had not noticed before. Someone pretending to be absorbed in a magazine, yet their posture was deliberate, feet planted for balance, eyes flicking up to watch her. The training told her to anticipate the worst. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was monitoring her, waiting to see how she would react. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, calm on the outside. Inside, adrenaline surged, but it was focused, disciplined, strategic. Fear had no place in her decision-making, only assessment, only action. The captain, sensing that the situation might escalate, quietly stepped closer to the cockpit doorway. His hand brushed the edge of the console, grounding himself, while his eyes remained fixed on the woman he had initially misjudged. He understood now that her presence was critical. Without her, the entire plane would be at risk. And yet, he had no idea what she was capable of, no idea how far her skill extended. All he knew was that the tattoo on her back had just altered the stakes in a way he could barely comprehend. Suddenly, the man in the jacket made his move. Not overtly, not dramatically. Just a slight lean, a hand brushing toward the concealed device. She recognized the motion immediately. Her hand shot to her backpack, fingers brushing against a concealed tactical tool she carried, small, efficient, designed for situations exactly like this. The moment was fragile, stretched thin between chaos and control. A misstep, a delayed reaction, or hesitation could trigger disaster. Yet she did not hesitate. Every fiber of her being was focused. Her eyes locked on him, cold, calculating, ready. The captain, sensing imminent danger, clenched his fists at his sides. His voice, usually steady, caught in his throat as he whispered to himself, "God help us all." Passengers continued their routines, oblivious to the silent battle lines drawn among them. A child laughed, unaware of the life-and-death decisions unfolding just a few rows away. A businesswoman typed an email, headphones in, blocking out the world. No one noticed that the air itself had grown tense, charged with anticipation. And then the first subtle tremor of action occurred. A slight movement, almost imperceptible, a shift in the man's weight, signaling his intent to act. She reacted instantly, sliding her hand over the device in her backpack, calculating leverage, trajectory, timing. Her mind ran scenarios at lightning speed. One wrong move from him, one hesitation from her, lives lost, innocent people caught in the crossfire. She measured angles, distances, timing. From the cockpit, the captain watched, barely breathing, realizing the danger had reached the critical threshold. He could not intervene directly without revealing himself and risking panic. He had to trust the woman who had been forced from her seat, who had the skill to neutralize the threat before it became catastrophic. The man's hand moved again, a subtle indication that he was about to pull the device free. She tensed, all calculations complete, decision made. And then a sudden flicker of recognition passed between her and him. Eyes locked, predator and predator, awareness of the other, understanding that only one would emerge unscathed. Passengers remained unaware, but the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, the hum of the engines masking the silent countdown of seconds that could determine life or death. Her body coiled like a spring, her eyes never left his. Her mind projected every possible outcome in a fraction of a second. She was ready. The man had no idea she was ready. And then, before he could make a decisive move, she acted. It was fluid, it was precise, it was terrifying. The cabin didn't scream yet. The moment had not fully erupted, but the first piece of chaos had been controlled, neutralized, and she was already positioning for the next. From the cockpit, the captain exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had underestimated her, completely. The quiet woman in the hoodie, displaced and humiliated, was no longer just a passenger. She was the plane's only line of defense. And as she prepared for the next move, something deep inside her stirred. Adrenaline, training, instinct, and a cold certainty that whatever came next, she would handle it. But she also knew something terrifying. The man she had just read was not acting alone. There was a second player, and this mission, whatever its purpose, was far from over. The storm had only just begun. 35,000 feet above the eastern seaboard, the plane hummed steadily, a vessel of steel and pressurized air carrying hundreds of unsuspecting souls. Yet inside, a different kind of turbulence had already begun, a tension that no instrument could measure. She sat in economy, hoodie partially slipped back to reveal the seal trident on her upper back. Her eyes scanned the cabin with relentless precision, nodding micro-expressions, subtle posture shifts, and the faintest hand movements that betrayed intent. She could feel it in the air. Something was wrong, not mechanical, not routine, human, calculated, intentional, dangerous. The man in the jacket, the one she had been observing, had stopped his subtle fidgeting, frozen as if sensing her awareness. But that pause was deceptive. He was not reconsidering. He was calculating the next step. A device, partially assembled and hidden under layers of fabric, rested against his side. His eyes flicked, seeking advantage, reading every motion of the cabin like a chessboard. Her body responded instinctively. Calm, controlled, ready. She adjusted her position subtly, bringing herself closer to the center aisle without attracting attention. The cabin remained oblivious. A child cried. A woman on her phone scrolled endlessly. Passengers ate, read, or napped. None noticed that a predator had silently activated his intent. From the cockpit, the captain felt it before he could see it. A flicker on the radar screen wasn't the problem. It was the vibration in his chest, the gut-level recognition of danger aboard the plane. He had served long enough to know that when the seal trident flashed in front of him, trouble didn't approach slowly. It arrived instantly, lethal and precise. He swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the cockpit doorway. He could leave the situation in the hands of the crew, or he could intervene, but even his authority had limits. The flight attendants were trained for service, not crisis. Passengers were helpless, and the only person with a chance of neutralizing the threat sat just a few rows away, her hoodie masking the fact that she was not ordinary. Then came the subtle shift that changed everything. The man's companion, the second operative, finally revealed himself. He moved quietly near the galley, a bulky figure pretending to stretch or adjust his jacket. Nothing about him was casual. The weight distribution, the cadence of his steps, the slight glance toward the back of the plane, it all screamed coordination. She noticed instantly, 2 targets, not one. The plan had been carefully orchestrated: distract, deploy, escalate. She cataloged their positions, their angles, their potential paths. In less than a heartbeat, she ran simulations in her mind: timing, trajectories, human variables, probability of detection. Passengers were still oblivious. A couple argued softly about seat space. A teenager fidgeted with earbuds. Life carried on in blissful ignorance. Her fingers grazed the tactical tool hidden in her backpack, a compact device, light, versatile, precise. She didn't draw it yet. She didn't need to. Patience was an ally she had long trusted. Wait, observe, strike only when necessary. The man in the jacket made a subtle motion again, this time with more confidence. She leaned imperceptibly forward, eyes trained on him. Every nerve in her body screamed that a trigger, literal or figurative, was about to be pulled. The captain's heart pounded. He had to maintain composure, conceal his fear, monitor the plane, and trust the one person he barely knew yet instinctively understood to be lethal. The rules of protocol were meaningless now. Survival depended on rapid, decisive action. Suddenly, a jolt ran through the aircraft. Not turbulence, something deliberate. Mechanical systems remained stable, yet a shiver ran through the fuselage. Cabin lights flickered for a second before stabilizing. Passengers murmured, some startled, some annoyed, but she recognized it immediately. Someone had initiated a manual interference, something subtle enough to avoid alarm, but intentional. Her eyes narrowed. The first man's hand had brushed against his device, a careful motion to avoid detection. The second operative shifted closer to the galley, likely monitoring cabin surveillance cameras, flight attendants, and potential escape paths. The plane was no longer just a vehicle. It had become a battlefield. She inhaled, exhaled, and prepared. Her body relaxed, muscles coiled like springs. Movement had to be precise, lethal if necessary, minimal in exposure, maximal in effect. She was not going to fail, not here, not now. The passengers, entirely unaware, continued their routines. Drinks sloshed gently in cups. A child laughed, completely oblivious to the danger inches away. A businessman adjusted his tie. An elderly woman dozed quietly. The illusion of safety masked the tense storm brewing between predator and predator. Then a subtle indicator, a glint under the cabin lighting, revealed the first operative's concealed device in full view for a fraction of a second. She didn't flinch. Instead, her mind raced through contingencies: incapacitation methods, distance calculations, timing windows, human variables. One wrong move could trigger catastrophic failure. From the cockpit, the captain's instincts screamed again. He understood the gravity, but he could not act directly without causing panic. Every second that passed increased the potential danger. And yet, he noticed a strange calm radiating from the woman in economy, a certainty and control that was almost otherworldly. She observed the cabin, marking positions, calculating movement paths, predicting the actions of 2 highly trained adversaries. Her breathing remained steady, pulse unnoticeable. Adrenaline surged, but it was precise, focused, not chaotic. Every action she would take had already been rehearsed mentally, contingencies layered like the most intricate plan. Then the first act of aggression occurred. A subtle, calculated movement by the man in the jacket, a shift in weight, a hand brushing closer to the device, signaled the initiation of the threat. Instantly, she reacted. Fingers reached for the tactical tool in her backpack. Not yet drawing it fully, she adjusted her body, preparing to engage while maintaining the guise of a civilian. The second operative made his move simultaneously, stepping slightly forward toward the galley, eyes scanning for observers. Coordination. Precision. She identified it immediately, as if she could read their intentions before they even manifested. The captain, watching from the cockpit doorway, exhaled slowly. He had underestimated the situation. The flight attendants were unaware, the passengers oblivious, and yet a deadly operation was unfolding around them. His only hope was the woman in the hoodie, the one whose tattoo he had glimpsed, the one who had silently assessed the entire cabin. She had already begun her approach. Not aggressive, not reckless. Calculated, precise, surgical. Every step, every shift of her weight designed to maximize efficiency while minimizing exposure. The first operative, sensing movement, glanced up. Recognition, fear, hesitation. She had seen it only a fraction of a second, but enough to know she could control the engagement. Her eyes flicked to the second operative near the galley. Predictable, slight adjustment of stance, overconfidence creeping in. Timing, angle, she calculated it. And then the first physical engagement began. She moved like a shadow, fluid, controlled, landing with minimal force but maximum effect. The first man stumbled, disoriented, unable to respond effectively before she regained balance, fully prepared for the next confrontation. Passengers screamed instinctively, unaware of the precision and control in the midst of chaos. Drinks spilled, bags toppled, panic spread, but she remained calm, assessing, controlling, neutralizing. The captain gritted his teeth, watching the unfolding scenario with a mixture of awe and terror. He had never seen such expertise outside of classified operations, and yet he understood fully now why that tattoo mattered, why her presence was crucial, why the entire flight depended on her skill. And deep in her mind, she knew the storm had only just begun. The second operative was still at large, the device still a threat, and the lives of everyone on board still entirely within her hands. She exhaled slowly, readying herself for the next move. Calm, precise, lethal, and utterly unyielding. The plane hummed on through the clouds, oblivious to the human storm brewing in its aisles. And somewhere deep inside, she prepared for the confrontation that would decide everything. The cabin erupted in chaos, but she moved with fluid precision. Screams echoed, trays clattered, passengers ducked instinctively, hands over heads, phones dropped onto the floor. Yet she remained composed, every movement deliberate, every muscle responding in perfect harmony with years of training. Her eyes locked on the first operative, the man with the jacket and the concealed device, and in that instant her calculation was complete. Incapacitate quickly, prevent escalation, protect the innocent. He lunged suddenly, a crude attempt at leverage, but she anticipated it. With a swift pivot, she grabbed his wrist, twisting it sharply while dropping her shoulder into his chest. The device clattered to the floor, barely contained. Shock registered in his eyes. Confusion, fear, and rage flickered simultaneously as he stumbled backward into the aisle. Passengers shrieked, clutching their seats and each other, some frozen in disbelief. Others scrambled, crawling under armrests or ducking low. Flight attendants shouted instructions, but they were utterly unprepared for the violence that had erupted in what had been a peaceful flight. She didn't hesitate. Her movements were surgical. Using the man's momentum, she slammed him against the sidewall of the cabin. The impact reverberated through his frame, a precise combination of leverage and force that left him disoriented, gasping for breath, his device rendered useless. Meanwhile, the second operative, lurking near the galley, froze mid-step. He had been watching, waiting, coordinating, but she had already calculated his trajectory, anticipating the angle and timing of his attack. One glance at her, the trident partially visible beneath the hoodie, and his confidence faltered. The predator had encountered prey far more lethal than expected. Passengers screamed again as she pivoted, eyes snapping to him. Calm, controlled, precise. She advanced with minimal exposure, moving like a shadow down the aisle. The cabin's narrow space gave her advantage. She knew how to manipulate it, how to cut off escape routes, how to isolate the threat. The second operative raised his hand slightly, pretending to surrender. But her eyes, trained to read subtle tells, detected the lie instantly. A micro-tremor in his fingers, a slight shift in stance, the weight distribution on his feet, it all betrayed intent. Her mind ran through possibilities at lightning speed. Neutralize him physically without risking the device. Use the aisle as leverage. Protect passengers. Timing was everything. She didn't panic. Panic was for the untrained. She had mastered chaos. In one fluid motion, she closed the distance, grabbing his wrist as he lunged toward the galley. With a twist and a shift of weight, she sent him stumbling back into a row of seats. A seat's metal frame rattled, passengers screamed louder, yet she moved with total control. Her calm amidst the storm was unnerving. The captain, still near the cockpit doorway, watched the entire sequence with a mixture of awe and terror. He had known instinctively she was extraordinary, but witnessing it firsthand was another experience entirely. She wasn't just neutralizing the threat. She was rewriting the rules of the engagement, adapting in real time, lethal yet controlled, precise yet rapid. The first operative struggled, groaning as she pinned him to the aisle with controlled force. His jacket was twisted, his device useless on the floor, his mobility restricted. For a fleeting moment, he made eye contact with her, and in that glance was fear unlike anything he had ever known. The second operative, trying to recover, attempted a desperate move, lunging again toward her. But she was already predicting it. In a single motion, she pivoted, blocked, and forced him to the floor, applying a pressure point technique that immobilized his arm without causing permanent damage, yet enough to prevent resistance. Passengers were beginning to understand, finally, that this woman was not a typical traveler. Eyes widened. Some people whispered prayers, some froze, some recorded secretly on phones, capturing what they would later describe as a miracle in motion. The captain cleared his throat, finally finding a voice amid the chaos. "Everyone stay calm. Remain seated. Do not interfere." His words barely penetrated the screams, but he gestured toward the restrained men, and flight attendants began cautiously moving forward, attempting to assist where they could without putting themselves in harm's way. She had eyes everywhere, assessing. The cabin was still vulnerable, yet the immediate threat was neutralized. She kept one operative pinned, the other restrained, ensuring neither could access the device or create additional chaos. Her breathing remained steady. She allowed herself no relief, no distraction. Adrenaline was present, yes, but focused, harnessed. Every detail mattered: the next move of the men, the reactions of passengers, the potential for panic to escalate into stampede-like chaos. She controlled the chaos, bending it to her will like water through a channel. The first operative attempted to speak, his voice trembling. You don't." "Shut up," she said quietly, sharply, eyes locking on him. "Move and you'll regret it." He understood immediately. Fear replaced arrogance. He remained still, pinned by her precise hold. The second operative, immobilized on the floor, attempted a glance toward the galley, likely searching for something else. But she shifted, blocking his line of sight, forcing his head down, maintaining absolute control. The captain exhaled slowly, realizing the danger was not yet fully gone. There were still unknowns. He could see now why the woman had been forced out of first class. The authorities who had booked the flight might have been aware of her presence but had not expected her to take immediate action. And yet, here she was, neutralizing threats without hesitation, without showmanship, without panic. Passengers, finally beginning to comprehend the gravity, whispered to one another, fear and awe intermingling. Some attempted to thank her, some prayed silently, some stared in disbelief. She didn't acknowledge them. Her focus remained on the threats. Then the first operative made a subtle move, just enough to test her attention to see if she could be distracted. Her reaction was instantaneous. A slight adjustment in stance, pressure applied differently, immobilizing him further while maintaining her balance. The second operative tried again, using misdirection, but she anticipated it. Each micro-motion was catalogued, predicted, countered. She was not reacting. She was controlling, orchestrating, ensuring that every threat was contained. And yet, even as she dominated the confrontation, a part of her mind scanned beyond. The cockpit, the potential for further danger, the subtle cues of hidden devices. This wasn't over. The first wave had been neutralized, but she knew better than anyone that another could follow. The plane hummed steadily, seemingly ordinary from the perspective of engines and instruments. But within the cabin, reality had shifted. Lives had been saved through skill, training, and instinct, and she had been the fulcrum upon which safety balanced. The captain finally stepped closer, understanding fully the gravity and the rarity of what he had witnessed. He saw the SEAL trident, partially visible, and realized fully. This woman had been forged in circumstances most people couldn't even imagine. He also understood the unspoken message. She did not need recognition, nor gratitude, nor praise. She did her job, and she would do it again if required. And as the immediate threat subsided, she maintained vigilance. Every eye in the cabin was now on her, some in awe, some in fear, some in disbelief, but she remained unshaken. The storm wasn't over. It had only escalated to the next phase, and she knew it. Because the men restrained now were not the true masterminds. They were pawns, and she could feel deep within her instincts that the real threat, the orchestrator, was still somewhere on the plane, watching, waiting, calculating. Her breathing remained steady, calm, controlled, focused. She was ready. The plane carried on through the clouds, oblivious to the life-and-death battle contained within its narrow aisles. And she, quiet, deadly, and resolute, prepared for the next move in a game only she truly understood. The cabin finally began to settle, but the tension was far from over. The two operatives she had neutralized were now restrained, unable to make a move without catastrophic consequences. Passengers whispered, some shaking, some teary-eyed, all slowly realizing the severity of what had just occurred. But she didn't allow herself the luxury of relief. She scanned the cabin again methodically, analyzing every detail, every passenger, every crevice for threats. Her instincts, honed over years of clandestine operations, told her one thing: the real danger hadn't shown itself yet. She crouched slightly, observing the restrained men. One was slumped, groaning, clearly shaken. The other tried to feign unconsciousness but failed. The tension in his jaw betrayed him. They were soldiers, yes, but controlled only by her presence. Outside the cabin, passengers remained oblivious. Inside, a silent war was still being waged, and she was the general directing every move. The captain, still at the cockpit doorway, couldn't tear his eyes away. Every motion, every calculated pause, every micro-expression she displayed spoke volumes. He had witnessed high-risk situations before, but this was entirely different. The cabin had turned into a battlefield without anyone realizing it. One misstep from him, one interference from the crew, could trigger panic. Yet with her, there was an unspoken order. The passengers were safe because she allowed them to be, not because the crew could control the chaos. Then she noticed it, the subtle signal, almost imperceptible. A passenger near the back row shifted slightly, trying to look inconspicuous but moving in a deliberate, purposeful way. Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordination, observation. She had been expecting it, but she hadn't seen it until now. The man wasn't acting recklessly. He wasn't panicking. His movements were calculated, measured, designed to avoid detection while gaining the upper hand. He was small, unassuming, the type who could blend in easily. But she saw through the disguise. Her eyes tracked his subtle hand movements, the way his weight shifted just enough to suggest preparation. The instinct screamed. He was the orchestrator, the mastermind behind the midair chaos. Her body tensed, muscles coiling like springs. She had to act now. Not recklessly, not visibly, but decisively. One false move and the consequences would be catastrophic. She assessed the distance, the line of sight, the potential reaction of every passenger nearby. Timing was everything. She didn't have seconds to waste. The captain sensed the shift immediately. Something had changed. His gut told him the storm wasn't over. He couldn't intervene directly. He could only trust the woman in economy, the one who had already saved the plane once. His authority didn't matter, her skill did, and she was about to demonstrate it again. The mastermind finally revealed himself fully. He moved toward the aisle with a predatory calm, pretending to be adjusting his seatbelt, but his eyes flicked toward the restrained men. He was calculating, watching for an opportunity, measuring her reactions. She anticipated his intent. Her training allowed her to read the moment before it happened, to predict not just his movements but his next 3 moves. She shifted slightly, positioning herself between him and any potential threat to passengers. Every step he took was countered by her calculated positioning. The captain exhaled slowly. This wasn't a fight that could be contained in the aisles without casualties. Yet she moved with an almost supernatural precision, fluid, silent, deadly. Every motion minimized exposure, maximized control. The first operative, restrained but conscious, made a feeble attempt to speak, but she silenced him with a glance. No noise, no hesitation. She didn't need to draw attention to herself. The threat was visible, and passengers still believed this was only minor turbulence or a passenger dispute. The mastermind reached into his jacket, subtle but deliberate. A small metallic glint caught her eye, not a coincidence. The device. Another one more concealed than the first. Her pulse didn't rise, she didn't panic. She adjusted her stance imperceptibly, ready to act. Timing had to be perfect. A miscalculation could trigger disaster. She was aware of every variable, the angle of the aisle, the movement of passengers, the subtle vibrations in the cabin, even the hum of the engines. All of it mattered. The captain's breathing became shallow as he watched her prepare. He had never seen such poise in real-time crisis. He wanted to advise, to intervene, to do anything, but he couldn't. Only she had the skill, the training, the experience to neutralize the threat without triggering catastrophe. The mastermind finally acted. A subtle flick, a hand reaching for the device, eyes scanning for distraction. But she had anticipated it. She moved like a shadow. Her hands were faster than he could process, fingers brushing against the metallic glint in a precise disarmament motion. The device clattered harmlessly to the floor. Passengers screamed instinctively, some diving under seats, others clinging to loved ones. The chaos was visible, but her control was absolute. She moved with lethal efficiency, forcing the mastermind back, her presence dominating the narrow aisle. He tried again, desperation creeping into his movements, but she was already 3 steps ahead. Her stance, her weight, her angle, it all prevented him from executing any dangerous action. She controlled every inch of space between him and the passengers, leaving him only the illusion of freedom. The captain finally found his voice, projecting it firmly, authoritatively. "Remain seated. Do not approach. This is under control." His words barely reached some passengers, but enough of them listened to avoid interference. She didn't need to speak. Her eyes, her stance, her actions conveyed all that was necessary. One wrong move, and the consequences would be immediate and fatal for the operatives, but she maintained lethal restraint, ensuring no passenger would be harmed. The first operative attempted a feeble attack on her, but she redirected him effortlessly, twisting and pinning him without losing focus on the mastermind. The coordination between her movements and her awareness of the cabin was flawless. She neutralized both threats without striking unnecessarily, ensuring that control remained absolute. Her mind ran ahead, predicting potential contingencies, secondary devices, hidden collaborators, even the possibility of passenger panic escalating to stampede-like chaos. Each scenario had a countermeasure, already rehearsed mentally, ready to deploy. The mastermind finally froze, realizing that his calculated attempts were consistently thwarted. Her calm, lethal efficiency left him exposed, controlled, unable to act without immediate consequence. Fear flickered across his face. This was not an ordinary woman. This was someone who had survived situations no ordinary human could endure. Passengers began to murmur, some standing cautiously, some pointing in disbelief. The two operatives were now immobilized, neutralized, and yet she remained vigilant, scanning for any remaining threats. The captain approached cautiously, now fully understanding the situation. He saw the sealed trident exposed partially beneath her hoodie and realized the weight of what had just occurred. The lives of every passenger depended entirely on this woman. She exhaled softly, but her eyes never relaxed. Control remained absolute. Precision remained paramount. The threat had been neutralized for now, but she knew better than anyone. The orchestrator may have been stopped, but the storm was not yet over. The plane continued its journey through the clouds, engines humming, unaware of the precise chaos contained within. She remained focused, lethal, calm, and ready. Because she knew, deep in her instincts, that the real test wasn't over, and that the lives in this cabin depended on her continued vigilance. The cabin was quieter now, but only superficially. The two operatives she had subdued remained pinned, but she knew the threat was far from over. She moved slowly down the aisle, eyes scanning every passenger, every movement, every shift of weight. Her body exuded controlled energy, calm on the outside, lethal on the inside. Every instinct screamed that the orchestrator might not have been acting alone. Someone else could emerge at any second. The captain, still near the cockpit doorway, had finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. But he kept one eye on her, understanding that the situation remained precarious. He had witnessed her neutralize the immediate threat with precision and control, but he knew her vigilance could not waver. Any lapse could result in catastrophe. Her attention flicked to the back of the plane. A subtle shift in a seat belt, the edge of a bag slightly moved, a shadow in the overhead bin, small details that most passengers would miss. Her instincts told her this was the true orchestrator, waiting for the moment to strike. She didn't hesitate. Every step, every motion, every breath had purpose. The orchestrator finally revealed himself. A man in plain clothing, blending seamlessly with passengers, but his eyes betrayed a predatory focus. He had been monitoring her actions, calculating, waiting. His hand hovered near a concealed device tucked under his jacket, subtle yet deliberate. She recognized the movement immediately. Years of training allowed her to anticipate action before it occurred. She adjusted her stance, positioning herself between him and the rest of the passengers. Her mind calculated the exact distance, trajectory, and timing required to neutralize him while minimizing risk. The captain's pulse hammered. He could see the device in the man's hand, the potential for disaster, and he realized he had no authority here. He could issue commands, but she had the skill, the training, the lethal precision necessary to prevent a catastrophe. The orchestrator made the first move. A subtle shift, designed to distract and create an opening. She anticipated it, pivoting her body with fluid precision. Her hand brushed against the device in his jacket, a controlled motion that caused him to stumble slightly. Passengers screamed instinctively, some diving under seats, some clutching their loved ones. Chaos erupted in the cabin, but she remained composed. Every movement was calculated, every adjustment precise. She forced him back, using the aisle and his own momentum to her advantage. He recovered quickly, lunging forward, desperation and frustration flashing across his face. But she was ready. She stepped aside, guiding his momentum past her, and in a single motion redirected him toward the restrained operatives. The impact rattled the metal of the seats, but she maintained control, ensuring no passengers were harmed. The captain, gripping the edge of the cockpit doorway, felt a mixture of awe and terror. He had seen trained operatives in simulations, in briefings, in controlled exercises, but nothing compared to this. She wasn't reacting, she was controlling. Every second, every movement, every threat was accounted for. The orchestrator tried another maneuver, reaching for a hidden device in his sleeve. She anticipated it, shifting her weight, twisting his arm, forcing him to drop the object. It clattered harmlessly to the floor. Passengers screamed louder, some scrambling for safety, but she didn't flinch. Her focus was absolute. She moved with surgical precision, ensuring that the orchestrator could not regain control. Her eyes locked on him, and in that glance, he realized the extent of her skill, her training, her experience. Fear replaced arrogance. He was no longer the predator, he was a pawn in her control. The captain finally spoke, projecting his voice to maintain order. "Remain seated. Stay calm. This situation is under control." His words carried authority, and passengers obeyed, trembling but compliant. She didn't speak. Her actions were enough. She forced the orchestrator to the floor, immobilizing him with precise leverage. The two restrained operatives now had no opportunity to interfere. The cabin, though still tense and filled with frightened passengers, was slowly coming under her control. She scanned the cabin once more, eyes flicking to every corner, every seat, every shadow. Her instincts screamed that she had neutralized the immediate threats, but she remained vigilant. Any second, a hidden device could be triggered, or another accomplice could emerge. The captain, watching her, realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. She had not only neutralized a high-level threat mid-flight, but she had also done so without causing harm to passengers. Her calm, precise, and deadly efficiency had saved lives. The orchestrator struggled, but her grip was unyielding. She applied subtle pressure, keeping him immobilized while maintaining her awareness of the rest of the cabin. She moved like a shadow, fluid, controlled, deadly. Passengers began to murmur, some cautiously peeking from under seats, some holding their phones in disbelief. They saw the aftermath. Restrained men, a woman in a hoodie who had calmly orchestrated their safety, and a captain who looked simultaneously terrified and awestruck. She allowed herself a brief internal exhale, but her eyes never relaxed. The plane was still a confined space filled with hundreds of lives. She knew better than anyone that one lapse could change everything. Her training, her instincts, her experience, all were engaged, ready for any eventuality. The orchestrator made a final attempt, a feeble struggle that revealed both frustration and fear. She responded immediately, twisting and redirecting him with precision, ensuring no chance of success. He realized he was utterly overmatched. The captain finally stepped forward, placing a hand on the cabin divider. "Ma'am, we need to secure these passengers. Can you maintain control while we assist?" His voice carried both respect and urgency. She nodded subtly, eyes scanning the cabin one last time. Her presence alone kept the orchestrator and operatives under control. The passengers, now slowly recovering from panic, remained seated but alert, sensing the authority radiating from her. The plane hummed steadily, unaware of the storm contained within. She maintained vigilance, ready for any sudden movement, any hidden threat, any final attempt at chaos. And deep inside, she knew. The real danger had been neutralized, but the adrenaline, the tension, the responsibility, these would linger long after the plane touched the ground. Her body remained calm, her mind focused, her instincts razor-sharp. She had done what few could, and she knew that lives had been saved by her skill, her composure, her deadly efficiency. The orchestrator and operatives were restrained, the passengers were safe, but she remained watchful. Because at 35,000 feet, nothing could be taken for granted. And she, quiet, deadly, and resolute, was the only thing standing between safety and disaster. The plane descended slowly, engines humming steadily as it pierced through clouds tinged with gold from the setting sun. The cabin was quiet now, but it was not calm. Every passenger was alert, trembling, still absorbing the chaos that had unfolded just hours ago. Phones were raised, capturing the aftermath. Hands shook. Eyes widened. Mothers clutched children. Businessmen stared in disbelief. And through it all, she remained seated, composed, unshaken, the very image of lethal serenity. The captain finally exhaled fully, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the cockpit doorway. He had never experienced a flight like this, one in which every passenger's safety depended not on instruments or training, but on a single woman whose presence had been underestimated at every turn. Her calm, her deadly precision, her complete control had averted catastrophe, and now he realized the full scope of what she had accomplished. The restrained operatives, groaning and subdued, were finally in the hands of air marshals, who had been called discreetly via encrypted communication once she had neutralized the immediate threat. The orchestrator, the mastermind behind the attack, had been rendered helpless by her calculated maneuvers. He sat on the floor, hands cuffed, glaring at her with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Every move he had attempted had been anticipated, countered, and neutralized. She had outmaneuvered professionals trained in clandestine operations. Passengers began to whisper, some cautiously applauding, some crying quietly, some still too shocked to comprehend the gravity of what had occurred. They saw only glimpses, a woman in a hoodie calmly controlling chaos, subduing men who could have caused mass death. They did not fully understand the years of training, the instincts honed over missions, the countless moments where hesitation meant failure or death. They only knew she had saved them. The captain finally approached her, voice low but laden with awe. "Ma'am, I don't even know where to begin. That was extraordinary. You saved everyone." She nodded subtly, still scanning the cabin for any remaining anomalies. "Stay alert," she said quietly. "We're not completely secure until the ground crews handle these men." He swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand, but the plane is safe. They're all restrained. The passengers are alive, that's thanks to you." A hush fell over the cabin as she rose slightly, pulling her hoodie back over her shoulders, revealing the seal trident fully to the passengers. Gasps rippled through the cabin. For the first time, they truly understood the scale of her skill. The symbol was not just a tattoo. It was a mark of survival, of lethal training, of someone forged to operate in life-and-death situations. Passengers began asking questions, voices trembling with awe. "Who are you? Are you a SEAL? How did you do that?" She offered no personal answers. There was no need. The focus remained on safety, control, and moving forward. Her actions spoke louder than words ever could. The captain watched her with newfound respect. He had flown countless flights, witnessed emergencies, and faced crises in the air, but nothing compared to this. He had seen fear, panic, and heroism, but never the level of precision, control, and lethal efficiency that she had displayed. Every calculation, every movement, every silent assessment had saved lives. The air marshals moved through the cabin, guiding passengers to remain seated, gathering information and securing the operatives. The mastermind and his accomplices were finally removed, their plans thwarted, their threat neutralized. The plane hummed steadily toward its landing, engines vibrating softly under the winged fuselage. Passengers began to exhale collectively, the first signs of relief breaking through the tension. Mothers whispered prayers of thanks, children clung to their parents, and business travelers shook with disbelief. Cameras, phones, and eyes documented her calm composure, her quiet authority, and the unmistakable aura of someone who had operated in lethal environments and controlled life-and-death situations with absolute mastery. The captain returned to the cockpit, his hands shaking slightly as he prepared for the final descent. He couldn't stop thinking about what had occurred. A woman displaced from first class had turned the tide, controlled a potentially catastrophic situation, and saved hundreds of lives. She had done all this silently, without fanfare, without ego, and with precision that few could imagine. The landing was smooth, controlled, executed without incident. Ground crews were ready, law enforcement was briefed, and emergency response teams stood prepared at the tarmac. As the plane taxied to the gate, passengers clapped quietly, some rising to give her recognition, some offering murmurs of gratitude. She remained composed, quiet, letting the moment pass without acknowledgement. Her mission had been complete. Lives had been saved. Her presence had been invisible until her actions revealed their impact. Once the plane stopped, emergency personnel moved in to escort the restrained operatives and the mastermind off the aircraft. Passengers disembarked cautiously, some shaken, some tearful, but all aware of the incredible skill and courage they had just witnessed. The captain lingered near the door, waiting for her. "Ma'am," he said again, voice filled with respect and awe. "I don't know who you are or how to thank you, but you just did something extraordinary. You saved everyone on this flight." She simply nodded, eyes scanning the tarmac for any residual threats, still alert even as adrenaline began to ebb. "Keep vigilant," she said. "The plane isn't safe until everyone is accounted for. That's all." The captain exhaled slowly, finally realizing the depth of her training. This was not an ordinary passenger, not even an ordinary veteran. This was someone who had been forged by circumstances most could not survive, whose presence had turned the tide in a situation that could have ended in tragedy. Passengers began sharing the story across social media, calling news outlets, capturing images of her quiet authority and composure. Headlines would later read about the mystery hero on Flight 813 or Woman in Hoodie Saves Hundreds Midair. But no words could capture the depth of what had occurred. Only those aboard knew the precision, skill, and bravery required to prevent disaster at 35,000 feet. She finally gathered her belongings, the trident now fully visible, the hoodie adjusted over her shoulders. She walked toward the gate quietly, leaving passengers and crew alike in awe. Some whispered her name, some offered thanks, but she accepted nothing. Recognition was unnecessary. Action was her measure. The captain followed her for a moment, stopping at the aircraft door. "I'll never forget what you did," he said, voice hushed. "The way you controlled that everything. I've flown for decades and I've never seen anything like it." She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Just keep flying," she said, "and stay vigilant." As she disappeared into the airport terminal, the weight of her presence lingered. Passengers and crew alike would never forget the woman who had been forced out of first class, who had faced chaos with lethal precision, and who had turned potential catastrophe into safety with nothing but her skills, instincts, and courage. The plane sat on the tarmac, engines cooling, but the story of what had happened would ripple far beyond its cabin. Lives had been saved, a threat neutralized, and heroism had manifested in the most unlikely of passengers. And somewhere quietly she prepared for the next challenge, because for someone like her, vigilance never ended. Danger was never far, and the trident on her back was not just a symbol, it was a promise. She would act and she would protect, no matter the odds. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky crimson. Inside the terminal, passengers whispered, sharing stories, eyes wide with awe. And somewhere in the midst of them all she vanished, leaving only the memory of courage, control, and a reminder that heroes often appear where least expected. The storm was over, the plane was safe, and she remained untouchable.